quiet landscape stretches beneath a wide open sky, where grasses sway across low. Wet ground and shallow pools reflect the pale morning light. Scattered trees and reeds frame the distant Potomac, while narrow paths cut gently through the natural terrain. Horses graze nearby, and small groups move across the landscape carrying tools and supplies. There are no monumental buildings, no crowded streets, and no skyline. Only open land, water, trees, and a distant horizon. The atmosphere feels calm and untouched, as if the future capital has not yet begun to take shape. Then small signs of change begin appearing. Surveyors cross the open ground carrying measuring instruments, driving wooden stakes into the soil and stretching lines between them. Wagon tracks slowly multiply as workers and materials arrive. Trees are cleared in selected areas, revealing patches of bare earth, while timber, bricks, stone, and tools begin collecting near the developing work sites. What was once an irregular, natural landscape starts becoming organized into straight paths and carefully measured spaces. Horses pull heavy carts through the soft ground, and workers move steadily across the frame as the first foundations of a planned capital begin to emerge. Construction gradually intensifies. Deep excavations appear where the capital will rise, and laborers move stone blocks, timber beams, bricks, and barrels of supplies across the muddy terrain. Wooden scaffolding climbs higher as pale stone walls begin emerging from the ground. Horse-drawn wagons repeatedly arrive, leaving deeper tracks behind them. Beyond the construction zone, the landscape remains surprisingly open, with scattered houses and unfinished roads separated by grass and trees. But the capital is beginning to dominate the horizon, rising slowly above the young city. The surrounding capital continues to fill in. Dirt roads become clearer, pedestrians and horses appear more frequently, and wagons and carriages move between small brick and wooden buildings. The capital becomes more recognizable as columns and architectural details take shape, while scaffolding slowly disappears from completed sections. Smoke rises from distant chimneys, and workers carry materials between construction sites. The open fields are gradually divided by roads, buildings, and planned public spaces. The landscape is no longer untouched, but it still feels young, unfinished, and sparsely populated. Then the atmosphere changes violently. Smoke begins spreading across the city as the War of 1812 reaches Washington. Soldiers and civilians move quickly through the streets, while flames appear among government buildings. Horses pull loaded wagons through the haze as people hurry away carrying possessions. Firelight reflects through thick smoke, ash drifts across the scene, and the young capital stands surrounded by destruction. For a brief moment, the carefully planned capital appears vulnerable, almost disappearing behind the smoke and flames. Slowly, the smoke clears. Damaged structures are repaired. Workers return with stone and timber, and construction begins again. The capital becomes larger and more imposing as its damaged sections are restored and expanded. Streets grow busier with carriages, wagons, pedestrians, and government workers. Trees are planted along increasingly organized avenues, while brick buildings multiply around the open landscape. The National Mall begins to take on a more deliberate form, with broad, grassy spaces separating the growing architecture. Every passing year brings more movement and more evidence of a permanent national capital. The 19th century continues, and Washington becomes increasingly urban. Neighborhoods expand outward while the capital rises larger against the skyline. Horse-drawn carriages move along established roads. Pedestrians fill sidewalks, and delivery wagons carry goods through the city. Trees mature and create patches of shade, while homes, churches, government buildings, and commercial structures replace more of the empty land. The former wet landscape is steadily transformed into streets and organized urban spaces, leaving only small traces of its original marshy character. Then the city enters another period of upheaval. Soldiers appear throughout Washington as the Civil War begins. Military formations move along the roads, supply wagons cross the frame, and horses pull artillery and equipment. Canvas tents slowly spread across open, grassy areas, transforming spaces that had once been quiet. Soldiers, civilians, messengers, and government workers fill the streets. Thin smoke from campfires hangs over the landscape, while the Capitol remains a powerful stone presence beyond the activity, watching over a city suddenly shaped by war. When the war ends, the military camps gradually disappear. Soldiers and wagons move away, leaving disturbed patches of grass behind. Workers return to the open spaces and begin reshaping them into lawns and landscaped public grounds. Paths become more orderly, young trees are planted, and the city begins a period of rapid beautification. Horse-drawn streetcars appear along the developing avenues, bringing a new rhythm of transportation. In the distance, the Washington Monument begins rising from the landscape, slowly becoming taller until its pale obelisk stands prominently against the sky. As the new century approaches, Washington looks increasingly like the Capitol people recognize today. The National Mall becomes greener and more symmetrical, surrounded by carefully maintained lawns and mature trees. Electric streetcars move alongside horse carriages, and the first automobiles begin appearing on the roads. The Capitol Dome dominates the skyline, while the Washington Monument rises clearly beyond it. Visitors arrive carrying luggage, gathering around the monuments and walking through the expanding public spaces. The rough landscape of earlier generations has become an elegant, monumental center. Through the middle of the 20th century, the pace accelerates. Automobiles become the dominant presence on surrounding roads, while buses carry increasing numbers of workers and visitors. Large federal buildings expand the government's physical presence across the city. During the Second World War, Washington becomes even busier as workers and vehicles fill the streets. Yet the National Mall remains a broad green corridor through the growing Capitol, framed by the Capitol, the Washington Monument, museums, and government buildings. The decades that follow bring enormous crowds and defining moments in American history. Thousands gather across the National Mall for major demonstrations and public events. Marchers move beneath the open sky, carrying signs and flags, while crowds flow toward the Capitol and surrounding monuments. Between these historic gatherings, everyday Washington continues. Tourists cross the lawns, commuters move through the streets, buses arrive and depart, bicycles pass along the paths, and government workers continue their routines. The trees become fully mature, and the monumental landscape begins to feel permanent. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Washington has become a fully established modern capital. Traffic moves steadily along surrounding avenues. Buses and cars pass beneath mature trees, and tourists fill the mall throughout the day. The Capitol stands fully restored and monumental, its dome shining above the landscape. The Washington Monument rises sharply beyond it, while museums, memorials, and government buildings fill the once open horizon. The contrast is enormous. The same land that once held wetlands, reeds, trees, and muddy paths is now surrounded by one of the world's most recognizable political centers. Modern Washington continues moving beneath the fixed camera. Morning sunlight spreads across perfectly maintained lawns as joggers, cyclists, school groups, tourists, and government workers cross the frame. Visitors photograph monuments with phones and cameras. Buses unload groups of tourists, and cars stream steadily around the mall. At night, the landscape transforms under artificial light. Streetlights illuminate the paths. Buildings glow against the dark sky. The Capitol shines brightly, and the Washington Monument becomes a luminous vertical landmark above the trees. The seasons continue passing around the unmoving viewpoint. Summer crowds give way to autumn leaves. Winter strips the trees bare, and spring restores the green lawns. Rain darkens the pathways. Snow briefly covers the mall, and sunlight returns across the monuments. Generations of soldiers, workers, politicians, protesters, tourists, commuters, and families pass through the same landscape. The ground itself has changed almost beyond recognition, from open, wet terrain beside the Potomac into a carefully designed, monumental center, surrounded by a modern Capitol. By 2026, the National Mall is alive with people and movement. Traffic flows around its edges, mature trees frame the scene, and the Capitol stands firmly beyond the lawns. What was once nearly untouched land has become the heart of Washington, D.C.